can we just start? Can you tell us your name and just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay, I'm Alan Kawasaki, and I have a practice in Oakland, California. It's the practice of, there are 12 of us, and my background is I'm a Californian. I am what's called in Japanese American a sansei, meaning I'm third generation. My grandparents came from Japan, but my father was raised half the time in Japan, half the time here. And my mother was born here. So we have had, or I have had, influences of Japanese art, Japanese, my mother does flower arranging. The culture was always a part of my upbringing. So I kind of knew early on there are differences between sort of how I viewed aesthetics, or how I viewed what was good or not so good in terms of aesthetics. A little bit different. I didn't know why necessarily. And I found a lot of it had to do with my cultural background. Went to UC Berkeley, so where I then from there went directly to Harvard GSD. And during those periods of time, I worked at various architecture offices, and usually in the summertime. Mm-hmm. So by the time I graduated Harvard, I had a pretty good idea of what kind of office, what kind of environment I wanted to work in.
So was it always kind of the idea that you would end up as an owner someday? Did you? So
my generation, the older generation, whatever you want to call it, I think most people, I would say, at least in my graduating class at Harvard, we assumed we're gonna own. We assumed that we're gonna lead. In fact, we were told from day one, this is what you're going to be doing. We selected you for that, right? So that was the basic assumption, and I would say even later in life when I taught graduate school architecture at UC Berkeley. Even at that time, many of those students, most of the students, I would say, probably assumed that they would be in ownership someday. Mm-hmm. It's totally changed now.
Interesting.
Young people, I have two sons. One is he's he has, let's say, he's an engineer. He's more entrepreneurial. He's a professor actually, but he runs his own research group. So he's motivated to create and to make things happen. But my other son is probably even smarter. And one reason he's smart, he says, I don't need the stress. So I totally understand that. So I would say a lot of the a good portion of the younger generations that will say, hey, I'll be good at my profession, 5 days of the week, 8 or 9 hours of those days. But, life is much greater. Mm-hmm. There's a tendency amongst architects in general to not have that view. There's a tendency, because just as you said, many did not go into the profession because of, just financial. There were many things that a realization of expression of what you have is your vision or your art or whatever that is.
Absolutely right. So I've heard that echoed over and over again. And I think you're right. I don't know what the exact stats are, but I've seen something as high as like 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 architects will be a sole proprietor at one point in their career, because I think that lifestyle, right? I think it just kind of lends itself to, I want to be able to have that control over, what my work product is and who I get to work with and whatnot.
Yeah, I haven't seen the statistics recently, but I remember what you're saying, that the majority of licensed architects have at some point been a sole proprietor. And by that, I mean, we're really talking about the guy working out of his bedroom, maybe even having on occasion one person. Right. So you have that on the one hand. Let's just say the total number of architects who are doing single person, they're basically doing houses.
Right.
They're basically doing single family custom homes for very wealthy people.
Right.
There are a lot of these. And then you have this other group. They work for the huge, 200 to 20,000, huge, gigantic architecture and international firms. They're business corporations. They mill out, they turn out a product, and they have a brand. They have a brand. You go to such and so firm, and you can have an idea of what you're going to get back as a design. What has shrunk is what I am, which is, having a practice in which you have 10, maybe 50. In the range of having dozens of architects, the middle has shrunk and the ends have gotten bigger. Right. More architects doing either single or these corporate things.
Squeezed one way or the other, but yeah, I agree with that, especially based on my experience. It's very polarizing on both ends. But switching gears just a little bit, what would you say would be either one of your favorite parts of your job or something in particular that you get to do on a regular basis that you really enjoy about being an architect?
So what I enjoy doing is designing. I mean, that is, many architects would say that. But I also want to design in the way that, like you just said, in the way that I want to design, which is why I want to be an owner. I don't want someone to tell me, design it this way.
So kind of flip side of that, what would you say would be one of your biggest challenges or just one of the hardest parts in terms of what you do on a regular basis?
I've got, 12 people I'm responsible for. Their lives, right? Their families, their spouses, whatever, their rent, all that kind of stuff. And we're in a profession that is very competitive. And in downturns, like just right now as an example, it's the hardest thing of any senior person to have to lay somebody off. So when you own a firm, people work for you. And it's just not, if you have to downsize, and firms do that. The architect profession, they go up and they go down. It depends on the economy. And so the things that my wife's a CPA. You always got to do your taxes. So she always has a clientele and it doesn't ever change. Mm-hmm. But if companies have money and they're expanding, they'll build. And if they don't, they're shrinking and they won't. And so construction and design goes up and down. Right.
I was actually talking last week with Patrick McLeamy, who was the CEO of HOK for years. And I think he was there for 5 decades. He was there for 50 years and he's retired. He lives in the North Bay actually. And he wrote a book. And so he was kind enough to come do one of these. And he was talking about that very thing, which I think this book is written on basically how to be profitable and how to kind of manage the ebbs and flows of the construction industry, because when it's riding high, it's amazing, right? And almost you're at full capacity. There's too much work, right? People are working around the clock to keep it all going. And then the flip side of that is true as well. And we do these kind of expansions and contractions, and that's.
So my view of the whole COVID thing is it's not permanent. So we have very good people. So I'm doing everything I can. We've actually had a very good year, but we're going to see a few months where we're going to slow, and then we have another backlog of stuff coming up in February. So writing that out, making sure everybody stays, making sure they have we're even paying people go home and take a few weeks off. Here's some extra pay, because people do have to have a mortgage and all that. But in the long run, if your view is we are a team of really good people, you want to keep your team together.
If we're talking about projects that you've done, I hate to ask the question, like, what's your favorite project? That's not a reasonable question. It's like picking your favorite kid. But was there a project that stands out in your mind as something that maybe there's like a great learning lesson and or something that happened with that project that really just kind of separated it for you?
Well, there have been various projects that have affected me in different ways. And in my young career, I mean, one of the first buildings I did out of school, I think it was in the first year, was a residence, and nobody knows about it now, but it's called the Glickman Resonance, and it won, local, state AIA awards. So that was very important to me because I got to do a lot on that project. It's just myself and the principal. So I did most of it's his vision, but I did most of the drawings, most of the details, and contributed to the way that the building looked. So that was, and not a big project, but well recognized.
Gotcha.
And then the second influencer was a Center for the Arts at Yerba Buena Gardens. I was the project architect. The designer was Fumihiko Maki, my professor at Harvard. And I got to go to Tokyo to work with their office. And that's what I meant. It's like, at the highest end of things, right? But, I think that when, those were projects done where I was the guy helping to do someone's vision, great visions, right? But, want to try myself to see what I can do. And I was the senior, design principal of this big firm. But in a corporate world, there are many things. It's not just the client's wishes that affect how you design and what the decisions are and all that. It's not an individual's necessarily their decision. But in a corporate, what I would call a corporate firm, it's not necessarily about design in a vision. It's about design as a product. That was my view of it, right? Maybe slanted view, but and even the language we were using at that time told me it was product. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to just do something different, and so my main reason for breaking out was to eventually to do kind of what I can do today, right? It was not that way. Even when you break out initially, it's a lot of hard work. I mean, you don't get commissions that are exciting or necessarily interesting. It takes time before you get those kinds of commissions. The other thing I would say is, so different people break out at different times. And some people who break out early in their career, I'm talking about in their 20s, they just have more time to get their vision. So I broke out at, I think I was like 42 or something. It's kind of late to start your own firm. It takes a good 15 years or so before you actually get good projects that you can actually start getting awards and publications and things like that. Right.
That's so from the folks that have opened their own firm, I want to say it's split down the line. Some of them left with projects, not taking projects, but they were given the go ahead from, their prior firm as they go out on their own. Here you go. These are yours. Now you can work with this client. And some of them, I want to say Doug Tom stands out in my head. He said, I just did it. I just hung a shingle and, I figured we needed some business development process, but we just went out and we're like, all right, this is what we're going to do. And I guess my question would be which one of those is more resembles your experience, and would you have any advice one way or the other?
So mine was, I had this relationship with Maki, right? Fumiko Maki. He did have, continued to have projects. So when we broke out, Harish Shah and myself, we had a project to do. I mean, this is kind of unusual, right? Washington University, St. Louis, their Department of Art, their university museum, those are like one of our first commissions. I mean, we're the architects of record. Maki is the designer. He's got guys in Japan, very, very talented designers. And basically we form a team, together, but our real role is to make sure the working drawings are proper, all that.
Right.
Their role
Right.
is to set the vision.
Right.
But they did some of what we do, and we did a little bit of what they do. So there's that. But we left our firm, our prior firm, with that kind of a project. Actually, two projects of that side. Two projects that would be, with another, the other project was with Ricardo Legoretta. So we had two museums that we started our practice with, kind of unusual. On the one hand, on the other hand, we knew we have to eventually have our own designs and our own, vision, all that. So that has to start at the bottom. You just have to work, doing little projects for people. But we already had an income. You got to pay a mortgage. You got to pay. You can't go to the food bank, for that. You've got to be able to live. And
right.
And so, how do you do that? How do you figure that one out?
It's a $1 million question, and I'm seeing more and more folks who are offering kind of those business development services for an architect or design in general, just because. And you've alluded to it a little bit, but there is the lifelong pursuit of being an architect and a designer and everything that comes with that. And then there's the business side of architecture, right? And sometimes, someone like yourself, you're able to take both of those and make it work. Sometimes somebody's really, really good at one side and then not so great at the other side. And it's really hard to sustain a practice on your own if you only want to focus on that one thing. And I've seen that. I've seen, I think folks suffer from a little too much success a little too early, right? Where maybe they hadn't reached that threshold yet of having enough projects under their belt, but they got one piece of work that was going to allow them to go out on their own, but they relied a little too heavily on that. And that's causing some problems now, because if you're a sole proprietor and you've only got one or two clients, and those one or two clients dry up completely and or cut back, the services that you were going to provide in the project, the budgets are gone. It's like, man, what do you do now? So that's flip side of that, though, is if you're going to make it work, right? If you've take the island and burn the boats and you're like, this is what I'm doing, then you'll figure out a way to make it work. So yeah. I think it's kind of like anything else, but I'm always I love hearing those stories. I love hearing how people got started, because everybody's got a little bit different, but there's kind of the same, you get the same few principles needed to make it work. Who are some leaders in architecture that you admire, or someone who's inspired you? Obviously you've talked about your professor a few times. I would guess that would be one of them, but who else can you think of that would kind of fit that bill of admiration or inspiration?
The firm that I started with, started with as a full-time employment. Like I said, I worked summer times through school, but I went to a firm called Bakken, Argoni and Ross, now called BAR, B-A-R. Mm-hmm. And it's a totally different firm when I went to them than what they are now. So the principals back in Argoni and Ross, I admired their practice. I admired the way they all participated equally, in my opinion, in design, in the management, the risks, and in the practice that they had, the way the employees were engaged in that. I felt very fulfilled being part of the team and contributing to the practice, contributing to the success. We all were, like I just said, we were a team. We were 12, and we all felt like we belonged. And that is what I'm trying to emulate. That's kind of like what I want. I really enjoy going out, and I'm not, of course, I'm the old guy here, but people really like hanging out together. I'm saying not just at lunchtime. And people, by the way, they all hang out at lunch. Basically, in the culture that we have, people, they can go. We have lots of restaurants around here, by the way. I mean, they can go out and do whatever, lots of parks, but they choose to get their lunch come back and all eat together and enjoy the time around each other. So to me, that kind of family feeling, or the feeling like I really enjoy being with my colleagues and coming, that's something I felt in my first firm. I want to emulate. I want to have that here. And that's something I learned from whatever BAR back in Yerba and Ross were doing. I really respected that. I respected their design. They were tremendous. They were there's something called, we call it A+U 40 under 40. The top firm of principals under 40 years, and we were that. I mean, we were one of those groups. But yes, the fact that we were being published all over the place, that wasn't great. It was important. But actually, I just liked being with the guys, with my team, with the people designing around me, and each of us trying to do something. That was very, very fulfilling.
That's really cool. You made me think of a quote, and it was in relation to sports teams, but it obviously really applies here, which was, one of these intangible qualities of great teams across any sport was they shared meals together. And that was like, if you were a new coach coming in and you were going to take over a team, what was the quickest way to get to know your team, to build bonding?
Steve Kerr, someone was interviewing Steve Kerr the other day, like, what did you really like about, basketball? He said, I like being in the locker room with the guys. I mean, I really enjoyed the camaraderie. That's what he didn't talk about, particular game or shot, or he just talked about being with his team. And,
yeah.
and I think to me, that's really awesome.
Yeah. It's just, it gives you all the feels. I love that type of stuff. So,
yeah.
Awesome. All right. So last question for you. And I'm going to ask you kind of in two parts. So it's, what's the best advice that you could give an up and coming design professional? And I would say maybe from the aspect of something that you wish, so maybe something you've learned along the way that you wish that a younger version of you knew or that you could share. And then also as an principal, as an agency owner, as you're hiring young folks, out of college, they're coming to do internships, or younger designers, aspiring architects, what would be a piece of advice you could give kind of in that hiring process, or maybe just before the hiring process?
So there's a couple things that I used to tell this also to my students at Cal. And at that time when I was teaching, this was prior to Revit, this was AutoCAD time. And Cal had this attitude, oh, we don't need to teach AutoCAD because that's just something, it's beneath us. We're going to talk about the theory of architecture, and we're going to, it's like, oh, okay. But I used to tell my students, used to say, if there's any, you're really smart, you got in Berkeley, you're really brilliant. They're also really smart kids, but you want to get a job, make sure you go to, community college in the summer times and learn how to do AutoCAD. No firm is going to hire you unless you can actually draw in their system, whatever that is, right? So be practical about it. Now I would say, of course, it's Revit that you I think it's great to go to one of these, top schools in design, but make sure that you're employable when you get out. So, and what do I look at? Now, I say that, but what do I personally look at, like as an employer? If you want a job, okay, make sure you cover yourself for what most firms are going to look for. And they're going to look for Revit, right? But if you want to work for me, I kind of look for someone who can design, but also a little bit of sparkle. I mean, a little bit of they're passionate about it. It's not just, I guess I look for a younger me. I look for someone who really wants to do, great design, great architecture at some point. And this is more like in the way that our firm happens to work. Not every firm is this way, but so typically when the folks come in to our firm initially, chances are they're going to work with me a lot because I don't do Revit. I don't do SketchUp. So I have to have someone who can be my hands. But there is a benefit to that. They can see kind of like how I design, how projects are formulated, but I also will not hire someone who does not want to become an architect. And by that, I mean, I want someone who's very seriously wants to be licensed, who really aspires to great design. And my preference is to someone who would want to be an owner. I pay equal to or better than any of, other firms, right? But I give a lot more education. So by that, if people are taking tests in our firm and they pass, we pay for the test. We give them extra time as a bonus, just to say, we want you improving, right? And whether that's for licensing or whether that's for lead, we want to encourage, we want to support our young folks, coming up in the profession. I would rather have a person who felt like their greatest compensation was the fact that we taught them things than necessarily the pay. I'm going to pay them more than average. I'm going to pay them, but the real benefit should be, I want the guy who wants to take my seat. That's
right.
What I want.
I love it. The experience and the skills, yes. the acquisition of skills.
If you want to command a high salary someplace, you've got to be better than the next guy, right? And you have to, sometimes it may mean you don't take the easy path right out of school to make the biggest buck right out of school. I would say, if there's someone like that, if you think you're going to get the biggest buck, there's something they're not giving you. They're giving you dollars.
Yeah.
They're not giving you experience. Be careful how you weigh salary versus what is your end goal.
Right.
And think about how you can get the skill sets to get to your end goal. That's the most important thing.
Right. Oh, that was awesome. That was a great answer. Awesome. Alan, thank you so much.